Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome friends. This is the 9th lecture on this course in political parties and party system in India. And today in this lecture we are going to discuss Bharatiya Janata Party and its contribution to Indian politics. This is the second lecture on Bharatiya Janata Party, and in the previous lecture, if you remember, we have discussed the formation of Bharatiya Janata Party, its ideology and leadership, and also its relationship with Bharatiya Jansangh and the RSS. So, this we have discussed in the previous lecture on Bharatiya Janata Party. In this lecture today, we are going to discuss basically the rise of BJP, which has been phenomenal since 1980s, its formation, and particularly since 1990s. So, we will discuss the rise of BJP in Indian politics since 1990s, and then we closely examine its expansion under the leadership of Vajpayee and Advani, and also Modi and Shah. We will also discuss the expansion, strength, and the major challenges of BJP and its future prospect in Indian politics in this lecture today. If we look at the history of political parties in India and the growth of Indian party system, the rise of BJP since 1990s has been spectacular in Indian politics, and this rise of BJP has a far-reaching implication on Indian politics and democracy as such. So, in terms of ideology, in terms of nature and characteristic of Indian politics, there are scholars who argue that the rise of BJP has led to a kind of ideological shift in Indian politics, where for a very long time the politics in India was dominated by center of the left or left of the center by the Congress party, and many left leaning parties starting from communist to the socialist. And since the 90s, there is a kind of shift where you find right of the center and ideology of that kind dominating political discourse in India. So, its rise since 1990s is spectacular, and it has far reaching implication on Indian politics and democracy. And since 90s also, you see a kind of dramatic geographical and political expansions and transformations of BJP. So, it would be wrong when we discuss and talk about BJP to have a kind of very caricatured, rigid or the fixed understanding of the BJP. In terms of its ideology, leadership, it has undergone a series of change, transformation, and continuously it reinvent itself, as we see in terms of its social support base or its geographical location. BJP has managed to expand its base by constantly changing its strategy, its policies to appeal to the newer sections, especially the youth, the middle class, and so on. And also territorially, it has expanded beyond the Hindi heartland. So, the party has undergone dramatic geographical and political expansion, and political in a sense when party for a very long time the since the time of Bharatiya Janasangh was remained somewhat a marginal or a sideline kind of party in Indian politics, where it was finding difficult to align with other political parties. From that kind of situation, BJP in 1990s or in late 80s began to align with many other political parties, even from the ideological camps which is in opposite to the ideology of BJP. So, this constant revision of its position or change in its strategy led to a position where BJP acceptability as a mainstream party has increased. So, from its small, restricted and localized presence in few north and northwestern states in 1980s and 1990s, to its territorial and political expansion through its allies, has transformed the party into the main political force in Indian politics with mass national following. And this is something which we need to understand when we discuss about the rise of the BJP. In the beginning it was confined or limited to the few states in the Hindi heartland in North India or northwestern India, but gradually it expanded to many other parts in India, and politically through its allies it has been able to expand its social base from North India to the northeast and also in the south. So, this BJP has managed to do by forming alliance with the regional or state parties, and gradually it has now as we have seen in 2014 election or 2019, and even before that since 1990s the BJP becoming the single largest party in the parliament has led to new analysis or examination of Indian party system, and BJP is now truly a formidable force or main political force in Indian party, and it has the ability or the position to shape the way other political parties including Congress and many regional and state party interact with each other. So, in that sense it has acquired the capacity to define the system as Congress used to do in 1950s and 60s, and BJP is no doubt now a national party with mass national following. However, before we understand this rise of the BJP, we also need to understand the role of Bharatiya Janasangh in the formation and also this growth of the BJP. In the early decades after the independence, Bharatiya Janasangh provided a limited but a solid ideological and social foundation for the BJP. So, there was a kind of cliche about Bharatiya Janasangh that they are not really interested in winning election, but to expand the gradual base which is based on Hindutva or Hindu nationalism, and the motive of the party was to expand its ideology, to convince the voters about the ideology of Hindutva or Hindu nation. So, Bharatiya Janasangh in the decades of 1950s and 60s, and if you see their vote and seat share also, which constantly growth from the first general election till 1967, and particularly in after the emergency in Janata Party government, Bharatiya Janasangh electoral performance was remarkable. So, there has been constant growth of Bharatiya Janasangh or right wing Hindu parties as it is called, and precursor to the Bharatiya Janata Party. there has been a kind of constant growth in terms of their vote share and also the seat share in the general election. And more importantly, these Bharatiya Janasangh provided a very solid ideological foundation or the social support base for the BJP, and from that foundation BJP expanded to newer territories, newer social groups and so on in later decades. Janata experiment provided the Janasangh much needed political acceptability among the mainstream political parties. So, as I have discussed in my previous lecture that Bharatiya Janasangh remain a very marginal force in Indian politics with very limited support base and uneasiness or a kind of sideline by the other mainstream political parties dominated by left of the center or left leaning parties including socialist and the communist. However, after the Janata experiment, Bharatiya Janasangh got much needed political acceptability among the mainstream political parties, and after its formation in 1980s as the Bharatiya Janata Party, Vajpayee and Advani provided inspiring leadership to the party, and its image of party with difference garnered electoral dividend in many states as well as in the general elections. So, after its formation in 1980s, Advani and Vajpayee through their leadership and politics created an image of Bharatiya Janata Party by somewhat distancing it from the old Bharatiya Janasangh days, and also the ideology of the RSS to make it more moderate, more acceptable or accommodative to the changing circumstances. And they have meticulously also tried to create the image for the BJP as different from the corruption ridden political parties on the one hand, or the political opportunist kind of leaders and political parties on the other, and thereby BJP acquired the image of a party with difference, with some kind of ideological coherence, organizational discipline and also commitment to nationalism and so on. And that image of party with difference enabled the BJP to garner electoral dividends in many state assembly elections and also in the general election in the following decades. After this success in state and general election, the combined leadership of Modi and Shah, the recent growth or expansion of the BJP, this combined leadership of Modi and Shah, besides more effective coordination between RSS and the party. So, in the previous lecture, if you recall, we have discussed how BJP requires the support of the RSS for its expansion, for its electoral victories, for the mobilization of men and resources on the ground. During the time of Vajpayee, there was a time when there was growing difference between the party and the RSS leadership. Under the leadership of Modi and Shah, we see a better or more effective coordination between RSS and the party, which has made the BJP a formidable force in Indian politics. So, in terms of ideology, organization and resources, BJP remains a matchless political party in India. For the first time in 25 years, BJP has obtained majority of seats in the Lok Sabha on its own in 2014 and repeated it again with even more seats in general election of 2019. This BJP has truly become a national party and formidable force in Indian politics. If we closely look at the growth or the rise of BJP under Vajpayee and Advani, uh, uh, since its formation in 1980s, it was under the leadership of Lal Krishna Advani and Atal Bihari Vajpayee that BJP became the single largest party in Indian Parliament, and this is for the first time happened in Indian politics, where a non-Congress party becomes the single largest party and also formed a full term non-Congress government. The two stalwart represented the two face of Hindutva or Hindu nationalism, where Advani was seen more as a kind of militant or hardline face of Hindutva or Hindu nationalism, and Vajpayee is seen more as a kind of moderate face. However, both of them were deeply embedded in the philosophy of Hindu nationalism and close associates since Bharatiya Jan Sangh days. So, they remain a complementary force for the BJP to strengthen its ideology and make it more coherent on the one hand under the leadership of Lal Krishna Advani, where ideologically it becomes much more fundamental, much more coherent, and by projecting the image of Vajpayee as moderate face of Hindutva, it made a kind of strategical or tactical decision to align with other regional and state parties even when they are coming from other ideological force. So, these two stalwart representing the militant and the moderate face of Hindutva enabled the BJP to garner or to align with other political parties on the one hand and consolidate its own support base on the other. So, they were very critical of Congress pseudo secularism and made nationalism a major plank of BJP ideology. So, since 1980s and 90s, when there was a corruption case involving Rajiv Gandhi and the Congress party and their minority appeasement, particularly in the Shah Bano case, enabled the BJP to criticize the secular politics followed or practiced by the Congress party, which they called pseudo secularism, because it was about securing vote banks and so on, and their own notion of secularism as positive secularism, which is about equal respect for all religion. Advani's Rath Yatra and subsequent Ram Janmabhoomi Andolan made BJP a popular political party. So, in 1984 election, it did not perform well electorally. After the Advani's Rath Yatra and subsequent Ram Janmabhoomi Andolan, BJP became a popular political party, and accordingly its electoral performance also improved. This electoral performance of BJP can be seen through this table, where in 1984 it had only 2 seats in the parliament, but in 1989 it went up to 85, 1991 to 120, 1996 to 161, in 1998 it got 182 seats, and in 1999 183 seats, becoming the largest single party. And since then in 2004 it has 186, which came down to 116 in 2009. Again in 2014 it got the single not just the single largest party, but also the majority of seats on its own, winning 282 seats, and in 2019 303 seats. So, this rise of BJP since 1984, winning just 2 to now 303 seats in 2090 election, shows the phenomenal growth and the rise of BJP in Indian politics. Vajpayee, being the founding president of the BJP, uh, uh, played a crucial role in aligning with the other political parties. However, in terms of making the BJP a popular political force, Advani presidentship since 1986 played a very important role in making the BJP as a mass party, and party managed to raise the issue of Bofor's case and projected itself as the anti-corruption crusader. In the initial years, its electoral prospect was very bleak. However, its electoral performance gradually improved, so much so that it led first full term non-Congress coalition government at the center between 1999 to 2004 under the prime ministership of Vajpayee. Advani's Rath Yatra from Somnath to Ayodhya in September 1990 helped BJP garner the majority votes, and Ayodhya movement was perhaps the biggest mass movement in the history of independent India. So, remember 1990s was a time when there was a kind of flux or uncertainties, no parties winning majority on their own, and there was a necessity of forming government through coalition. In that situation, Advani managed to make BJP a mass based party by undertaking this Rath Yatra and the subsequent Ram Janmabhoomi Andolan. So, since then the Ram temple in Ayodhya remains the central issue of the BJP's manifesto. However, in the national politics, it followed the strategies of accommodation and compromise to get new political allies. It supported along with communist VP Singh government after 1989 election and withdrew its support in 1990s. So, on the one hand you find BJP being more committed to its core support base by consolidating its ideological position, and on the other hand it was being more politically accommodative and even compromising on many of its ideological position to align with other political parties. So, during this phase party has seen many ups and downs. It was hard to find political alliance. Many regional or state parties joined and moved out of NDA coalition led by BJP for fear of losing their secular votes. So, many regional party like All India Trinamool Congress or National Conference or Biju Janata Dal came to NDA fold and moved out of it because of the fear of losing their secular votes. However, during these decades Vajpayee became Prime Minister for 3 times, in 1996 for 13 days, for 13 months in 1998 and for a full term in 99 until 2004. It was under the Vajpayee government that India became a nuclear power country after the Pokhran test in 1998. It also successfully fought Kargil war. Vajpayee attempts to forge peace with Pakistan and his Kashmir policy was widely appreciated, and it started a new bridge or new dialogue between Indian and the political forces in Kashmir. He was also the key to form and lead alliances with other political parties. So, during the Vajpayee era, BJP in terms of governance or in terms of foreign policies also started many new initiatives and projected India as as a powerful country in terms of taking decisive actions when it comes to say nuclear power, nuclear test in Pokhran, or also fighting the Kargil war. And also the peaceful or the soft soft power, as it is called in diplomacy, by starting new dialogue between Pakistan and India, and also initiating new approach to solving Kashmir issue. However, during the Vajpayee era, there was on and off tussle between the moderate policies of the Vajpayee and the RSS, and often that leads to many differences between Vajpayee and the RSS. Vajpayee had a towering presence within and outside the outside the BJP. However, for the 2004 general election, party launching India signing debate proved to be a disastrous for the party when Congress led UPA came to power and formed the government, and they repeated that big victory in 2009 also. However, BJP in this phase of Advani and Vajpayee formed government in many states in Himachal, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and so on. Under the leadership of Modi and Amit Shah, BJP has achieved many milestones in Indian politics. It is now the largest political parties in the world in terms of membership, and it has become a formidable force in Indian politics. The clean image and trustworthy and decisive leadership of Narendra Modi, combined with the organizational strength of the RSS and effective campaign strategies of the party president Amit Shah, make BJP as a dominant political party in Indian politics. So, the rise or growth of the BJP is a result of this combination of factors coming together favoring the rise of the BJP in terms of its ideology, organizational discipline, leadership, and also the strategies and resources that it commands, help the BJP to become the dominant political party in Indian politics. And it is under their leadership that BJP has come back to power in New Delhi with resounding mandate in 2019. Their decisive and aggressive campaign strategies are based on this twin ideology of Hindu nationalism and development. So, the core support base of the BJP remain intact by their aggressive projection of Hindutva or Hindu nationalism by combining it to many of their developmental initiatives. And its electoral fortune are result of a number of factors going BJP's way. As we have discussed, it has a strong and decisive leadership, its organizational and economic resources are matchless, and it has effective control over media narratives. So, all of these factors enable the BJP to become a very dominant and many would argue a system defining party in India of today. BJP started its 2014 campaign under the leadership of Narendra Modi with a crusade against the black money and equating Congress with corruption. Its many leaders, if you recall electoral campaign in 2014, expressed about the idea of Congress Mukt Bharat by creating a new India with the slogan of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas and Sabka Biswas. However, in 2018 state assembly elections, BJP suffered a major setbacks in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan and Chhattisgarh, where Congress formed the government, and Congress also did well in Gujarat and formed government in Karnataka with the support of Janata Dal Secular. Now, Karnataka is ruled by the BJP under the leadership of Yediyurappa. However, the electoral performance of the Congress and it is forming the government in the three major states, signals a kind of a message to the BJP about the prospect of Congress still being a credible or a strong oppositional force in Indian politics, and their idea of Congress Mukt Bharat has suffered setbacks because of their performance in the assembly elections, and also in the national election in terms of opposing to the many policies of the BJP, bringing about new schemes like Nyay and so on. So, on the other hand, what you see, there is a growth of the BJP, but that growth do not wipe out the possibilities of other political parties, and now very few leaders from the BJP talk as aggressively about Congress Mukt Bharat as they did in 2014. Although there have been many new initiatives undertaken by the BJP government in terms of welfare programs such as Ujjwala Yojana, Jan Dhan Yojana, Mudra loan schemes, Ayushman Bharat, Make in India, abolition of triple tarak, abrogation of Article 370, national NRC, and also citizenship amendment bill. So, these are the major issues or initiatives undertaken by the BJP government at the center since 2014. It also undertook many bold and far reaching measures or decisions such as demonetization to curb black money, or GST, which is seen as a major disruptor in Indian economy. The objective to take these measures of demonetization or GST was to bring transparency, formalize economy and curb black money. However, growing unemployment combined with agrarian crisis and economic slowdown are the major challenges before the BJP government now, and there are growing unease, and that is the bigger worries for the Congress. Among its bigger worries for the BJP, among its allies, although there are better and effective coordination among the various frontal organizations of the BJP such as ABVP, its student wing, Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh or Bharatiya Janata Yuva Morcha and so on. So, they work in tandem with better and effective coordination. However, there are growing tensions amongst its erstwhile allies such as PDP, TDP, Janata Dal United, Shiv Sena and also Shrimani Akali Dal. So, all these parties help the BJP to expand its social and political base. However, with BJP becoming the dominant party, there is a kind of uneasiness or conflict, especially if you look at the Maharashtra scenario of today, you see there is a kind of increasing uneasiness among its allies. However, under the leadership of Amit Shah and Modi has ensured BJP's expansions both among new social groups such as OBCs, STs and SC, and also newer territories, particularly in eastern and northeast India. In other words, BJP resembles the catch-all characteristic of old Congress, with only difference in its ideology of right of the center instead of Congress left of the center, where it's pro-market, it's seen as a conservative force, maintaining the status quo. Then the Congress policies of restructuring the social forces, development with growth or equity and so on. Now, if we look at the growth and expansion of BJP beyond the Hindi heartland, BJP is no longer a Hindi heartland or Brahmin Baniya party as many scholars used to categorize it. One of its remarkable feature since 1980s has been its ability to reinvent itself and thereby maintaining its relevance among its core supporters and also bringing into its fold newer groups and communities. So, since 1980s there is a constant reinvention or reformulation of its strategies and tactics in consolidating its main support base and also expanding its support base by bringing into its fold newer groups and communities such as OBC, SCs, STs and also many minority community. So, it has successfully mobilized the aspirational middle class in post liberalized India and formed a formidable social coalition among the non upper caste OBCs, SC, STs and even religious minorities. Its ability to form a social cohesion of these communities has led many commentators to argue that caste based identity politics has run its course in Indian politics and BJP has successfully built a powerful narrative around nationalism and development, and that remains the core policies or politics of the BJP, and whole of its strategy revolves around this twin principle of aggressive Hindu nationalism combined with development. If you look at the political expansion of the BJP, it went ahead with forming political alliance with regional and state party much before the Congress realized or the other political parties realize it. It constantly tries, particularly under the leadership of Vajpayee, to form new political alliance. And it is through these alliances with regional and state parties that BJP managed to expand its footprints in newer territories and social groups. So, the political alliance was crucial for the BJP to expand its support base among the newer groups and newer territories. Now, if you look at the BJP's performance, one can divide three kind of states and that correspond to the BJP performance in those states. So, if you look at the primary states such as Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Delhi, Uttar Pradesh and Himachal Pradesh, which is traditionally BJP's core support base, and it has retained its prominent position in all of these states, which you can call the primary states for the BJP and its electoral performance, where its support base remain intact. In the secondary states such as Karnataka, Bihar, Maharashtra, Goa, Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, Assam, Punjab and Haryana, the growth of BJP has been phenomenal. So, in the secondary states of Karnataka, Bihar, Maharashtra, Goa, Andhra Pradesh, Orissa, Assam, Punjab and Haryana, its growth has been phenomenal. In the tertiary states such as Kerala, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal and northeastern states, BJP has made significant inroads, particularly in West Bengal or northeastern states such as Assam. Its performance is has been phenomenal, and it is very likely that it may be the secondary states for the BJP in next assembly elections. Particularly in Assam, it is already in the government with its allies AGP there. So, in these three kind of states, in the primary states its support base is intact. It has gained ground in secondary states which have been phenomenal, and in the tertiary states also it is making the significant inroads. So, although there are decline of support among BJP's support among the upper castes, if you look at its electoral supports, and since 1991 there are 10% decline of upper caste support to the BJP. However, this decline among the upper caste support to the BJP is sufficiently replaced by its increasing support among the OBCs, SCs and ST. Thus, the party has maintained its core support base both in terms of social demography and geographical territory. It has gained substantially in the secondary states, where it has become the main opposition party, such as in West Bengal and in Odisha. Its growth in tertiary states, particularly in north states, has been phenomenal. So, both in terms of politically or in terms of territorially, BJP's growth in the recent decades has been truly phenomenal, and that makes BJP a truly system defining party or a dominant party in Indian party system. And with its rise, there has been a tectonic shift in Indian politics towards right of the center ideology. So, from the left of the center or the left leaning ideology of 1950s, 60s, 70s and 80s, there is a shift in terms of the ideological basis of Indian politics towards right of the center. So, many scholars have characterized this phase of politics in India as democracy with majoritarian sensibility. That means, the Hindus views and opinions getting predominant space in policy formulation, in politics and so on. And that is seen as very different from say the secular image of Indian politics in 1980s or 90s, particularly under the Congress government. Since 90s, there has been a steady rise in BJP support base, both in terms of social demographic and also in terms of territorial geographic. So, it is no longer a Brahmin Baniya party. In fact, it has seen gradual but continuous decline of upper caste support base and increasing support from the OBCs, SC, STs and even religious minorities. However, these new supporters pose a challenge to the BJP, and that is the challenges the BJP is facing and its future prospect in Indian politics or in elections. So, these new support base of the BJP pose a challenge to it. So, in terms of its support base, it relies on non-upper caste groups such as OBCs, SCs and STs, and it has provided them representation and participation in the political process. So, it is no longer a Brahmin Baniya party in that sense. However, the leadership of the party remains in the hand of upper caste. So, its future prospect requires that the leadership position should be also given to these groups and community. Organizationally also, there is a challenge of coordination between the party and the RSS and its numerous affiliates. Although in terms of organizational strength, its ability to mobilize men and resources, BJP is a formidable force. However, according to many scholars like James Manner, it is largely a myth. So, for organizational support or the leadership, BJP relies heavily on RSS, and it is true that RSS remains the major source of BJP's organizational strength. So, the relationship or the coordination between the BJP and the RSS needs to be therefore better coordination or understanding the policies and programs of both in a much more balanced or harmonious manner. So, BJP really has very little scope of maneuvering um, on its own without the support of the RSS, and that remains a kind of challenge for the BJP. And therefore, many people argue that in India there is a probability of party becoming more of a centrist party, but in the case of BJP, many scholars doubt if BJP could manage to become a centrist party as Congress did. Another challenge before the BJP is to maintain cordial relationship with its allies. Besides its ideological clarity and decisive and dedicated leaderships and followers, it is with the support of allies that BJP has made inroads among newer social groups and territories. As we have seen, its expansion in 80s and 90s is primarily through its allies, its allies with the regional or state parties, that it has made inroads to the newer social groups and newer territories. Its growth, particularly in the secondary and tertiary states, are due to its allies with the regional or state parties. However, as BJP grows from strength to strength, its former allies are turning out to be its adversaries, such as All India Trinamool Congress, National Conference, Telugu Desam Party, Janata Dal United, Shiromani Akali Dal, and now Shiv Sena. So, all these allies pose a challenge to the BJP, and it has to maintain a cordial relationship with its allies. BJP's recent success, particularly at the national level, could be sustained only when it truly obtains the support and trust of every groups and communities. So, BJP has yet to reach out many groups and communities, particularly in a pluralist society like India. So, to do that, it needs to move beyond the rhetorics of Sabka Saath Sabka Vikas, and it needs to take the allies and other opposition parties on board on major social, political and economic issues confronting the country. So, much of BJP's electoral or the future prospect depends on its ability to reach out to the many groups and communities, and also to the oppositional parties, to develop a national consensus on major social, political and economic issue that confronts the country. Now, to conclude this lecture on the BJP, we have seen how it expanded both politically and also geographically since 1990s under the leadership of Vajpayee and Advani, and later under the leadership of Modi and Amit Shah. We have also discussed some of the challenges and the prospect that BJP has. So, BJP is now truly a dominant party in Indian politics. Its functioning, policies and decisions will have far reaching implication not just on Indian society, but also on the very nature of democratic politics and state in India. So, BJP has a very dominant or defining status in Indian politics today, not just in terms of electorally or socially, but also the way Indian democracy acts or behaves, particularly to its minorities or those who are marginal or excluded in the society. So, it must ensure transparency, accountability and inner party democracy to strengthen constitutional democracy in India, and some of these are required not just in the BJP, but in many other political parties, which we will discuss later on in this course. Developmentalism with Hindu nationalism remains the trump card for the BJP. However, its ability to tackle complex challenges of governing a vast, plural and diverse country like India shall determine its future prospect. Now, BJP is truly a national party and a formidable challenge to Congress and many regional and state parties. Its phenomenal growth has made the possibilities of third front as a viable alternative to Congress and BJP redundant. So, since last 25 years or so, you have seen even when there is a coalition government, it is led largely, it has been led by either Congress or the BJP. However, in 80s and 90s, there was times when the third front, that is non-Congress, non-BJP coalition of many regional or socialist or the communist parties coming together to form government at the center. However, in contemporary times also there is a discussion about the possibilities of third front emerging as a contender to the BJP and the Congress. However, we have there is very little scope of such formation taking place in contemporary times, particularly with the rise of BJP and Congress gaining its place in many states. On this lecture, you can refer to some of these books. There are chapters in Joya Hassan, Parties and Party Politics in India, on the BJP and the growth of Bharatiya Janasangh and the BJP relationship with Bharatiya Janasangh and RSS. Similarly, in Rekha Divakar, Party System in India, you find a chapter on the BJP. You can also refer to Bharatiya Janata Party on text on its constitution and rules, and then there are other texts like Austin Dennis and Peter Leon, the Bharatiya Janata Party of India. In Nirja Gopal Jayal and Pratap Bhanu Mehta edited Oxford Companion to Indian Politics in India. There are chapters on political parties which would be helpful to understand the BJP. And similarly, Mahendra Singh and Rekha Saxena, Indian Politics, Contemporary Issues and Concerns, has a chapter on party system where there is a discussion on BJP, its politics, ideology and performance. So, that is all in today's lecture on BJP. I hope with that you understand its formation, its growth, ideology and contribution to Indian politics, and also the major challenges and the future prospect of the BJP. I hope you like the lecture. Do share your comments and feedbacks. Thanks for listening. Thank you all.